The girl in the ice, the wind screamed across the frozen mining fields, sharp as knives, tearing at Jack's coat. Snowflakes danced in the air. Twisting and spinning before hitting the endless white ground, Jack pulled his scarf higher over his face as he trudged through the snow, his boots sinking deep with every step. The storm had been going on for 3 days now, and most of the camp workers stayed inside, huddled near heating units. But Jack was stubborn, and he had work to do. He was checking the outer ice line, making sure the heavy machines hadn't frozen over. The wind howled, and the white sky blended with the white ground until it was hard to tell where one ended and the other began. That was when he saw it, a strange shape under the ice. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from a jagged ice block, but as he stepped closer, his heart began to pound. It was a body, small, thin, lying curled up as if sleeping. Not human. Her skin was pale blue. Her hair a silvery white that shimmered even in the dim light. Her face looked peaceful, but her lips were pale. Her eyes shut tight. She wasn't moving. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He knew what the camp whisper said about strange finds in the ice. People spoke of alien plagues, curses, and old spirits buried under glaciers for centuries. If you touched one, you'd be dead within hours. That was the warning. And yet, as Jack stared at her, something deep in his chest twisted. She looked so small, so fragile. She looked like someone's daughter. The wind roared again, and Jack's instincts told him to move. Snow was already starting to cover her more. If he left now, she'd be lost forever under the ice. His hands shook as he dropped to his knees and pulled the small pickaxe from his belt. The ice was thick and hard, each strike ringing like a hammer on glass. Shards flew, stinging his face. He didn't stop. Slowly, the ice cracked away, revealing more of her. Her delicate fingers curled near her face, her legs drawn in tight, her chest moved. Just barely, she was alive. Jack froze, his breath steaming in the cold air. If she was alive, she needed warmth now, but if the rumors were true, touching her might kill him. He stared at her for a long moment, snow gathering on his shoulders. Then she moved, her lips trembled, and a sound escaped, soft and weak. It wasn't any human language, but somehow Jack understood the meaning. It was a plea. She was asking for help. Jack didn't think anymore. He dropped the pickaxe and reached into the icy pit. His hands closed around hers. They were so cold it felt like holding stone. Her skin burned with a strange frostbite. But he didn't let go. Her eyes opened, glowing faintly, and for a second, it felt like the world around them shifted. A deep sound, almost like a heartbeat, pulsed in the air. The snow seemed to stop falling. Just for a breath, Jack pulled her up and out of the ice, cradling her against his chest. She was light, almost weightless, but every second he held her, the cold seemed to sink into his bones. He began the long walk back to camp, the wind cutting against him like a blade. Each step felt harder than the last. Her breath was shallow, her skin icy against his coat. Jack whispered, "Hold on, little one," though he didn't know if she could hear him when he reached the edge of the camp. A few workers saw him and shouted in alarm. "Jack, drop her," one man yelled, waving his arms. "She's dangerous. The cryobane will kill you both." Another cried. Jack ignored them, pushing through the snow towards his small cabin. They could talk all they wanted. He wasn't leaving her, not out there, not in the ice. By the time he slammed the cabin door shut, his hands were numb. He placed her gently on his bed and wrapped her in every blanket he owned. Her eyes fluttered, her lips moving again in that strange language. Jack knelt beside her, brushing snow from her hair. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe now." She stared at him, and for a moment he thought he saw the faintest hint of a tear at the corner of her eye, Outside, the storm grew louder, and somewhere far away, a deep rumble echoed through the frozen air. Jack's cabin was small. Built from rough planks and lined with old insulation, the wind outside rattled the thin walls, and snow hissed against the windows like sand. Inside, Jack worked fast. His breath still fogging in the cold air, he threw more coal into the heater until the small flames flared bright, sending orange light across the room. The alien girl lay on his bed, wrapped tight in blankets, her skin pale and cold as stone. She didn't shiver, and that scared him. A body too cold to shiver meant life was slipping away. Jack grabbed the kettle from the shelf, filled it with water, and set it on the heater. Steam began to curl from the spout, the soft sound filling the room. He found an old mug and mixed powdered broth into it. It was the same broth he used after long work shifts, salty, hot, and enough to give warmth to tired bones. He sat beside her and held the mug near her face. "Drink," he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly, the silver-blue irises catching the light. She looked at him, then at the mug, but didn't move. Jack dipped a cloth in the broth and pressed it gently to her lips. She flinched at the touch of heat, but then parted her lips slightly, letting a drop in. It was slow, painfully slow, but she drank. Color returned to her cheeks, faint but there. Jack let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "You're going to make it," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if she could understand. She studied him with eyes too old for her young face, as if she was measuring his soul. Her lips moved, and she spoke again in that strange language. The words were soft, musical, yet heavy with meaning. Jack didn't know how he knew, but he felt she was saying, "Thank you." He smiled faintly and nodded. "You're welcome." Outside, the storm was still raging, but something was different through the small window. Jack noticed faint lights in the snow, not the warm yellow of camp lanterns. These were sharp and cold. Glowing green like shards of crystal, they flickered in the distance, moving slowly, like predators stalking prey. Jack's stomach tightened. He had seen lights like that once before, years ago, when alien raiders came for the mining shipments. They didn't belong to anything friendly. He stood and checked the rifle hanging above the fireplace. The old weapon was worn, the wood scarred from years of use, but it still worked. Jack loaded it and placed it near the bed. The girl's eyes followed him. She spoke again. This time, he caught one word. That sounded almost human. "Coming," she said, her voice weak. Jack's pulse quickened. "Who's coming?" She pointed toward the window, her small hand trembling. "The dark ones," she whispered, the words clumsy but clear. Jack felt the weight of the moment settle over him. Whoever or whatever these dark ones were, they were looking for her, and if they found her, they would kill him too. But when he looked at her, lying there with the blankets pulled up to her chin, her breath slow and shaky, he knew one thing. He wasn't giving her up. He stoked the fire until the heater glowed red, filling the cabin with warmth. It would make them easier to track, but it might also be the only thing keeping her alive. Hours passed slowly, the sound of the storm blending with the faint hum of the heater. The girl drank more broth, and her hands began to move with more strength. At one point, she reached out and touched his wrist. Her fingers were warmer now, but her gaze was still filled with something unspoken fear. Jack crouched beside her and said quietly, "No one is taking you." She tilted her head as if trying to understand the promise, then closed her eyes. For the first time since he'd found her, she seemed to rest, but Jack couldn't. The green lights outside were closer now, moving in a slow circle around the camp. He knew the others would be hiding in their bunkhouses, pretending nothing was happening. That was the way out here. Don't see, don't hear, don't get involved. But Jack had already broken that rule the moment he took her hand from the ice. Near midnight, a sound came through the storm, a deep, metallic growl. It wasn't wind, And it wasn't the heater, Jack's. Grip tightened on the rifle. The girl stirred, her eyes snapping open. Glowing faintly in the dim room, "They are here," she said, her voice trembling. Jack moved to the window. Peering through the frost, figures were moving in the snow. Tall, armored. Their shapes distorted by the storm. A voice boomed from outside, deep and alien, carrying through the wind. "Give us the girl, human, and you will live." Jack stepped back, his jaw set. He looked at her, and she looked at him. Neither spoke, but both understood he wasn't opening that door. The green light outside the cabin pulsed like the beat of a strange heart. Shadows moved across the snow, long and sharp, twisting in the wind. Jack stood at the window, his breath fogging the glass. He could see them more clearly now. The Karush, tall and broad, their armor made of black metal that caught the faint light like ice. Their helmets had no eyes, only smooth plates with thin, glowing lines where a mouth should be. They moved with slow, careful steps. Like predators that already knew the kill was theirs, Jack turned from the window and glanced at the alien girl. She was sitting up now, wrapped in the blankets, her silver hair falling over her shoulders. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim room, but there was fear in them. "Who are they?" Jack asked quietly. She hesitated, then spoke in broken human words. "Koresh." "Hunters." Her voice shook, and the word hunters seemed to hold more than one meaning. Killers, trackers, ghosts that never stopped following. Jack checked the rifle, making sure it was loaded. He grabbed his old mining tool belt, slipping a knife and small flare into it. The girl's gaze followed his movements, and she clutched the strange crystal around her neck. It was no bigger than a coin, but it shimmered faintly with its own light. Jack pointed at it. "They want that?" She nodded slowly. "If they take, no more me." Jack wasn't sure if she meant they would kill her or erase her from existence. Either way, he wasn't about to let it happen. A heavy thud shook the walls. Snow fell from the roof, and the heater rattled against the floor. The Karish were testing the door. Another thud followed. Louder this time, the girl flinched, pulling the blankets tighter. Jack moved to the door and slid the wooden bar into place. The door wouldn't hold forever, but it might by a few seconds. Seconds were all he ever seemed to get these days. The voice came again, deep and slow. Carrying the weight of command, "Human, step aside. The girl is ours." Jack raised his voice. "She's not yours, and she's not leaving with you." There was a pause, then a low, chilling laugh. "You think you can keep her?" The voice said, "We will take her from your corpse." Then, window to the left shattered, spraying glass across the floor. A Karish soldier climbed through, his black armor glistening with snow. Jack fired before the intruder fully stood. The rifles roared deafening in the small cabin. The shot struck the soldier's shoulder, making him stumble, but instead of falling, the Karish turned his head slowly toward Jack, the glowing lines on his helmet pulsing brighter. Jack swore under his breath. "Figures, you're tough." The girl cried out in her language, and the crystal around her neck pulsed with light. For a moment, the Karish froze, as if the glow held him back. Jack didn't waste the chance. He grabbed the hot kettle from the heater and flung the boiling water onto the alien's armor. Steam hissed and rose, and the soldier staggered back toward the broken window. Jack drove his shoulder into him, forcing him out into the snow. Another shadow moved at the doorway, a second Karish pushing against the wood. The frame creaked, the bar bent. Jack aimed, fired again, and the second intruder fell back into the storm. Breathing hard, Jack slammed the heater vent shut to dim the light. The girl's crystal dimmed too, and she looked at him with wide eyes. "They will come." "More," she whispered. Jack nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready, but inside." He knew they couldn't hold out like this. not against a full hunting party. The green lights outside began to shift, spreading wider, encircling the cabin like a tightening noose. The snowstorm seemed to work with them, covering their movements, making them ghosts in the white. Jack grabbed his thick coat and started pulling extra gear from the shelves rope. A small medkit, a flashlight. The girl tilted her head. Go. Yes, Jack said. We can't stay here. They'll tear the place apart. A loud crash came from the back of the cabin. Jack turned in time to see one of the back walls split open under the force of another armored figure. Snow poured in with a freezing wind, and the Karish reached forward with clawed hands. Jack pushed the girl toward the front door. Run. She hesitated, looking back, but he shouted again, Run. Her bare feet hit the snow outside, and she vanished into the storm. Jack stayed for one last shot at the intruder, then turned and followed her into the white behind them, the cabin. Groaned under the assault, the hunters were not giving up, and the storm had just become their hunting ground. The storm swallowed everything. Snow whipped across Jack's face, stinging his skin and blurring his vision. He could barely see the girl's small figure ahead, her silver hair whipping in the wind. Each step sank deep into the frozen ground, the weight of the rifle pulling at his shoulder behind them. Dark shapes moved through the blizzard. The Karish were still on their trail. Their green lights glowed faintly through the white. Slow but relentless, Jack caught up to her, grabbing her arm to steady her. Her bare feet were red from the cold, and her breath came in quick, shaky bursts. We can't outrun them, Jack said, his voice almost lost to the wind. She looked up at him, her lips trembling. Then, they take me. He shook his head. No, they don't. He scanned the landscape, nothing but snow and jagged ice ridges. Then he saw it, half hidden by the storm. An old supply shack from the early mining days. It was small, almost buried in snow, but it had thick walls and only one entrance. Perfect for making a stand. Jack led her toward it, forcing the door open with his shoulder. Inside was dark, the air stale. Old crates and frozen tools lined the walls, and the smell of rust filled the space. Jack shut the door and shoved a crate in front of it. The girl crouched in the corner, clutching the glowing crystal at her neck. Her eyes followed him as he moved quickly, pulling out tools, broken wood, and scraps of metal. He started building traps, barricades, anything to slow the Karish down. His hands worked fast, muscle memory from years of survival guiding him. Every sound outside was muffled by the storm, but he could feel the hunters closing in when he paused to load the rifle. He noticed her watching him closely. You fight. For me? She asked in broken words. Jack didn't look up. Yeah. Why? She whispered. Jack hesitated, his mind flashing to a small human girl's smile. His daughter. Long gone. Because once I couldn't save someone, he said quietly. I'm not letting it happen again. Her gaze softened, and she lowered her head. Holding the crystal tighter, Jack checked the heater in the shack. It was old, nearly dead, but he coaxed a weak flame to life. The faint warmth spread through the small space. And for the first time since finding her, she stopped shivering. Outside, a crunch sounded in the snow, followed by another, heavier step. Jack motioned for her to stay down. The green lights appeared. At the edge of the doorway gap, faint through the storm, a deep voice rumbled. Human. Last chance. Jack stood, rifle ready. No chance. He called back, his voice steady. The Karish didn't reply. They struck. The door shook violently as something massive slammed into it. The crate groaned under the impact. Jack fired. Through the wood, the blast echoing in the small space, a muffled roar answered him. The girl covered her ears. Her wide eyes locked on the door. Another slam came, splintering the frame. Jack grabbed a lit flare and hurled it out the small back window. It landed in the snow behind the Karish. casting red light across their black armor. The sudden glare made them hesitate. Just for a moment, Jack took the chance. He kicked the door open and fired again, the shot slamming into the nearest hunter's chest. The force knocked the alien back, and Jack slammed the door shut before the others could. "Rush in? Why you not run?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. Jack looked at her and gave a faint smile. "Because you're under my roof, and no one takes someone from my home." She didn't understand all the words, but she seemed to feel the meaning. Her lips trembled, and she whispered something in her own language. It sounded like a blessing. The storm outside grew louder, but so did the hunters' movements. They were circling the shack now, testing for weaknesses. Jack knew the fight wasn't over, but the fire in his chest burned brighter than the one in the heater. He wasn't just protecting a stranger anymore. Somewhere between the ice and this moment, she had become his responsibility. The girl sat close to the heater, her eyes never leaving him. Jack reloaded the rifle and checked his traps one more time. If this was the place he'd make his stand, he was ready, and if they wanted her, they'd have to go through him first. The storm outside never stopped. Snow tapped against the walls like cold fingers, and the wind sang in low, haunting tones. Inside the shack, the air was warmer now, the small heater glowing faintly. Jack sat against the wall, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the door. The girl sat near the heater, her knees pulled to her chest, the blankets wrapped around her like a cocoon. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sounds were the pop of the heater flame and the far-off crunch of boots in snow. The Karish were still out there, moving in slow circles, never rushing, never leaving. They were patient hunters, and patience was a dangerous weapon. Jack watched her from the corner of his eye. Her silver hair caught the orange glow, making her look almost like she was made of light. Her eyes drifted shut for moments at a time, then snapped open, scanning the shadows as if expecting claws to reach through them. "You should rest," Jack said softly. She shook her head. "No." "They come." He gave a small smile. "If they come, I'll wake you." Her eyes searched his face, as if weighing whether his words were true. Finally, she nodded and leaned back against the wall, though she kept the crystal clutched in her hands. Minutes turned to hours. The storm's voice rose and fell, sometimes howling like a wounded animal, sometimes whispering against the wood. Jack's eyelids grew heavy, but every strange sound outside snapped him alert again. Once a shadow passed the small window, tall, broad, moving with deliberate steps. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle, but the figure didn't stop. They were testing him, waiting for his guard to drop. He shifted his focus back to the girl. She was awake again, staring at him. "What?" Jack asked. She hesitated, then spoke slowly. "You? Not afraid?" Jack's lips twitched into a half smile. "Oh, I'm afraid." "Then, why stay?" she asked. Jack's voice grew quiet. "Because I've already lost a daughter once, and I'm not losing another." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The girl tilted her head, as if she understood more than he expected. She reached out one small hand and touched his arm. The warmth of her fingers surprised him. She wasn't ice anymore. Her lips moved, and she spoke something in her own language. The tone soft, almost like a song. Jack didn't know the meaning, but he could feel it. It was thanks, and maybe something deeper. They sat like that for a while, the silence between them no longer tense, but calm. Jack even allowed his head to rest back against the wall for a moment, but peace never lasted. Long out here, a faint scraping sound came from the roof. He opened his eyes, listening. It was light, slow, like someone crawling above them. The girl's eyes widened, and she mouthed one word. Karash. Jack motioned for her to stay low. He moved to the far wall and slid open the old tool chest, pulling out a flare gun. The scraping grew louder. They were testing the roof for a weak point. Jack aimed toward the sound and fired. The flare blasted through the thin metal and exploded in the stormy sky above. For a moment, red light washed over the snow, revealing 3 garish figures crouched on the roof and another 2 outside the door. The light also revealed something else, distant shapes in the storm, watching, not garish, something else entirely. The garish hissed and dropped back into the snow. Vanishing into the white, the girl stared at him, her face pale again. "Others," she whispered. "Not safe." Jack reloaded the rifle, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll stay right here until the sun comes up." She shook her head. "Sun? Never come here." The wind howled louder, as if agreeing with her. Jack realized she was right. This planet's long winter wouldn't end for months. There was no sunrise to save them, only survival until rescue. If it ever came, he looked at her again, and in that moment, a quiet certainty settled over him. If rescue did come, it wouldn't just be for her. It would be for both of them, because he wasn't letting go. The wind's cry had changed. It no longer sounded like the storm's natural song. It was sharper now, rising and falling in strange patterns. Jack listened, his hand resting on the rifle. The girl sat near the heater, eyes locked on the door. Her fingers pressed tight against the crystal at her neck. She was trembling again. Not from the cold, but from something else. Something she could feel before he could see. "What is it?" Jack asked, her lips parted slowly. "They call." She whispered, "They call others." Jack frowned. "Others like them." She shook her head, her silver hair swaying. Worse, before he could ask more. A dull thud came from beneath their feet. The wood floor shivered under them, dust falling from the ceiling. Jack's eyes darted around. The shack had no basement, which meant whatever was under them was in the ground. Another thud followed. Closer this time, the girl's voice was almost too soft to hear. "They dig?" Jack stood, scanning the walls for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the floorboards near the far wall. A black claw burst through the wood. Long and hooked, Jack fired without hesitation, the blast splintering the floor and sending the claw retreating. The sound that followed wasn't a roar. It was a low, vibrating hum that rattled the air in his lungs. The girl clutched the crystal tighter, its glow inside it flaring brighter than before. Jack glanced at it. "What is that thing really?" She met his eyes, her voice shaking. "It calls my people." "If I live," the words sank into him. "You mean that's a beacon?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, but it also call enemies." Jack's stomach tightened. They had been hiding in one place with a glowing target around her neck. He crouched beside her. "Then we move now." She hesitated. "If we move, they chase. They're already chasing," Jack said, his voice firm. He grabbed his pack, stuffing in the last of the supplies, then threw his coat over her small frame. The heater's warmth faded as soon as they opened the door. Snow blasted into their faces, stealing their lives. Their breath, the garish were shadows in the white, their green lights moving in slow, deliberate patterns. But now there were other shapes too. Larger, heavier, their movements jerky and unnatural. Jack pushed her ahead, keeping low, moving between jagged ice ridges for cover. The storm made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead, but he could feel the ground tremble under those heavy steps. One of the larger shapes broke through the fog, a massive tass. A massive lion, insect-like beast with armored legs and a body that glistened like black ice. Its head turned toward them, and a deep clicking sound filled the air. The girl whispered one word. Ravagers. Jack didn't wait to see what they could do. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a cluster of boulders. The Ravager lunged, its legs slamming into the snow. Sending icy powder spraying, Jack fired, the shot bouncing off its armor. The recoil jarred his shoulder, but he kept moving. The girl's crystal flared again, brighter than ever. The Ravager hissed and stopped, as if the light hurt it. Jack glanced at her. "You can use that." Her voice was breathless. "Not yet." "Need time?" "How much time?" She shook her head. "Don't know." "Keep me safe." The words struck deep. They weren't a request. They were trust. Jack planted himself between her and the approaching shapes. Reloading the rifle, the storm screamed around them, and the green lights of the Karish drew closer. It wasn't just one enemy anymore. It was two forces, both hunting the same girl, and Jack was the only wall between her and the dark. Another Ravager moved in from the side. Jack threw a flare into the snow, the sudden burst of red light making the beast recoil. He grabbed the girl and ran again, deeper into the ice fields. The sound of pursuit was everywhere now, heavy steps, the crack of ice under armored boots, the hum of alien voices. Jack's lungs burned. But he didn't slow. He could feel the weight of the storm pressing down, as if the whole planet wanted to keep her from leaving. At last, they stumbled into a narrow canyon, its walls high enough to block the wind. Jack pressed her against the rock and crouched in front of her, the rifle steady in his hands. "Do it," he said, nodding at the crystal. Her eyes closed, and the glow began to spread from the crystal into her hands. It wasn't just light, it was warmth, cutting through the cold like a living flame. Jack turned back toward the canyon, mouth ready to hold the line. If they wanted her, they'd have to pass him first. The crystal's glow grew brighter. It pulsed in the girl's hands like a living heart, sending ripples of warmth through the narrow canyon. Snow melted in small circles around her feet, steam curling into the frozen air. Jack stood at the canyon, mouth, rifle steady, his breath forming clouds that vanished as fast as they came. The first Karash appeared through the storm, their black armor slick with ice, green lights glaring through the swirling snow. Behind them, the larger shapes of the Ravagers loomed, their clicking echoing against the canyon walls. Two different predators, both focused on one target, the girl. Jack's boots crunched in the snow as he stepped forward, planting himself firmly in their path. "Last chance," the deep Karish voice growled. Jack didn't answer. He simply raised the rifle and fired. The shot struck one of the lead hunters in the chest, forcing him back a step. The Ravagers hissed and shifted, their legs digging into the snow. The girl's glow brightened again, and for a moment, both enemy forces hesitated. The light wasn't just bright, it was powerful. It pushed at them like an invisible wall. Jack glanced back at her. "Whatever you're doing, do it faster." Her eyes were closed, her voice soft as she spoke in her own language. The crystal's light shot upward in a thin, blinding beam. It cut through the storm, piercing the thick clouds above. The Karish hissed and covered their helmets, the Ravagers clicking louder in agitation. A deep rumble answered from the sky. Jack looked up through the swirling snow, his eyes narrowing through the clouds. Dark shapes began to appear, massive ships, their hulls glowing with the same light as the girl's crystal. The ground trembled as the ships descended. The Karash pulled back slightly, their leader barking orders in a harsh alien tongue. The Ravagers began retreating into the storm, vanishing like shadows at dawn. The girl opened her eyes, her silver irises glowing like molten metal. "They come," she whispered. Jack kept the rifle ready. "Your people?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. My people." The ships landed just beyond the canyon walls, their doors sliding open with a hiss of warm air. Figures stepped out tall, elegant beings with silver armor that shimmered in the light. They moved with calm confidence, their eyes locking on the girl immediately. One of them knelt before her, speaking in the same flowing language. She answered softly, her voice steady now. Jack stayed back, watching. One of the armored figures looked at him. Their gaze was sharp, measuring. The girl stepped forward. Placing herself between Jack and the warriors, she spoke quickly, pointing to him. The armored figure tilted their head, then bowed slightly to Jack. "You kept her alive," the voice said. Speaking in rough but clear human words, "You have." "Our gratitude." Jack lowered the rifle but didn't relax. "What happens to her now?" he asked. The warrior glanced at the girl, then at the crystal. "She returns to her place. She is heir to the throne." The words hit him like a blow. He looked at her. She wasn't just a lost child. She was royalty. Her life had never been ordinary, and it never would be. She turned to him, her eyes searching his. "Come," she said simply. Jack frowned. "Come where?" "With me," she replied. "You." "Father now." The alien warriors exchanged glances, but none spoke against her. Jack felt the weight of the choice settle in his chest. He could go back to his quiet cabin, finish out his days in the cold, alone, or he could step onto that ship into a life he couldn't begin to understand. The storm swirled around them, the green lights of the Karish fading into the distance. Jack looked at her, at the girl he'd pulled from the ice, the one who had turned his frozen heart warm again. He took a breath, then slung the rifle over his shoulder. "All right," he said. "Let's go." She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and took his hand. Together, they walked toward the waiting ship. The doors closed behind them with a soft hiss, sealing out the storm, and as the engines roared to life, Jack knew there was no going back. The ice had given him a daughter, and now the stars were calling.